I don't care who you think you are. You're nothing." The words tore through the airplane cabin like a battle cry. Jessica Martinez, flight attendant for Prestige Airways, was screaming at a passenger in economy class, her face twisted with pure rage. But what happened next would shock everyone on board. The sound of Jessica's hand connecting with the passenger's face echoed through the plane like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from every corner of the cabin. Passengers fumbled for their phones, recording what they were sure would be the end of this flight attendant's career. But the woman in seat 23B didn't cry out. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she calmly wiped her cheek with the back of her hand and did something that sent chills down Jessica's spine. She smiled. Not a pained smile, not a shocked smile, but a knowing, almost amused smile that said she knew something Jessica didn't. The air marshal was already pushing through the narrow aisle, his hand moving toward his badge. Other passengers were on their feet, some shouting, some recording, all of them witnessing what would become the most explosive confrontation in aviation history. Jessica, still trembling with adrenaline, had no idea she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because the woman she had just assaulted, this woman in worn jeans and scuffed sneakers, who looked like she couldn't afford a first-class ticket, was hiding a secret that would turn Jessica's world completely upside down. The passenger looked up at the flight attendant who had just struck her, and in a voice so quiet that people had to strain to hear it over the engine noise, she said 3 words that would change everything. "We'll see about that." Those words carried a weight that Jessica couldn't understand. There was something in the woman's tone, a confidence, an authority that didn't match her humble appearance. Something that suggested this wasn't just an empty threat from an angry passenger. But how did a routine flight turn into this moment of explosive confrontation? What drove a professional flight attendant to commit assault at 30,000 feet? And what was this mysterious passenger hiding that would soon have Jessica begging for mercy? If you want to see how this woman's shocking secret was revealed and how the tables turned in the most dramatic way possible, hit that subscribe button, because this story will have you questioning everything you think you know about judging people by their appearance. But first, have you ever had someone treat you badly because they assumed they knew who you were based on how you looked? Because that's exactly where this whole disaster began. And Jessica Martinez was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. Jessica, the 28-year-old flight attendant standing over Sarah's seat, was the perfect example of everything wrong with unchecked power. In her 3 years with Prestige Airways, Jessica had climbed the ranks not through hard work or genuine skill, but through manipulation and playing favorites with the right people. Jessica had a system that she thought was foolproof. First-class passengers got treated like royalty, warm smiles, extra attention, whatever they needed. She would laugh at their jokes, remember their drink preferences, and make them feel like VIPs. But economy passengers? They got the bare minimum, often less. In Jessica's twisted worldview, your seat assignment determined your worth as a human being. What made Jessica truly dangerous was that she had gotten away with this behavior for years. Complaint after complaint had been filed against her by passengers who felt mistreated, humiliated, or ignored. But somehow, Jessica always emerged unscathed. She always had protection, someone covering for her, always managed to shift the blame to difficult passengers or company policy. The reason for this protection was Jessica's dirty little secret. She was secretly dating Marcus Thompson, the airline's operations manager. Marcus had been quietly burying complaints, manipulating schedules to keep Jessica on prestigious routes, and ensuring that her behavior never reached the attention of anyone who could actually do something about it. This toxic combination of unchecked power and romantic protection had created a monster. Jessica truly believed she was untouchable, that she could treat passengers however she wanted without consequences. She had never encountered someone who could challenge her authority, never faced real accountability for her actions. But in 30 seconds, when the senior flight attendant would emerge from first class and see exactly who Jessica had just assaulted, that protection would evaporate like smoke. Because some secrets are too big to hide, and some people are too powerful to cross, no matter who you think you know. But let's rewind to 20 minutes earlier, when this disaster first began to unfold. Because what you're about to hear will make your blood boil with how quickly politeness can turn into pure cruelty. Sarah Mitchell had boarded Flight 447 just like any other passenger. She made her way down the narrow aisle, her worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor, her simple backpack slung over one shoulder. The moment Jessica Martinez laid eyes on Sarah walking toward the economy section, her mind went to work. Faded jeans with a small tear near the knee, sneakers that had seen better days, a plain t-shirt that probably came from a discount store. No designer handbag, no expensive jewelry, no first-class boarding pass. In Jessica's warped worldview, she had just sized up another low-class passenger who deserved nothing more than the bare minimum. What Jessica didn't realize was that Sarah had deliberately chosen seat 23B for this flight. She could have been in first class, she could have owned a private jet and never set foot on a commercial airline again. But she chose economy, because she wanted to experience exactly what regular passengers experienced when they flew with her company. An hour into the flight, Sarah began to feel the effects of her rushed travel day. She had been stuck in the Denver airport for 6 hours due to weather delays, surviving on nothing but airport coffee and a stale muffin. Her connecting flight had been delayed twice, and she was genuinely hungry. It was a simple human need, the kind any reasonable flight attendant would understand. Sarah pressed her call button and waited patiently. When Jessica finally made her way over, Sarah looked up with a polite smile. "Excuse me, I was wondering if I could possibly get an extra pack of peanuts? I had a very long layover and haven't eaten much today." It was a reasonable request. A kind request. The type of small favor that costs an airline absolutely nothing but means everything to a hungry passenger. Jessica's response was like ice water. She didn't even try to hide her contempt. Economy passengers get one pack, period. She said it with the tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a slow child. Sarah blinked, momentarily taken aback by the harsh response. She had heard about this behavior in complaints, but experiencing it firsthand was different. "I understand the policy," Sarah said calmly, "but I was just hoping for a small exception. I'm really quite hungry." Jessica crossed her arms and looked down at Sarah like she was something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. The answer is no. Economy means economy. If you wanted extra food, you should have bought a first-class ticket. The passengers around them were starting to notice the exchange. An elderly man in the row behind looked uncomfortable. A mother with 2 small children glanced over with sympathy in her eyes. This was exactly the kind of public humiliation that Jessica seemed to enjoy inflicting. Sarah took a deep breath. She could feel her temper rising, but she maintained her composure. "Could I please speak with your supervisor then?" And this is where Jessica made her first catastrophic mistake. Instead of backing down, instead of showing even a shred of professionalism, she doubled down on her cruelty. She leaned forward, close enough that Sarah could smell her overpowering perfume, and delivered the line that would seal her fate. "I am the supervisor on this plane, honey. Deal with it." The word honey dripped with condescension. It was the kind of dismissive tone you'd use with someone you considered beneath you, someone whose feelings didn't matter, someone who deserved to be put in their place. But Jessica's nightmare was just beginning. Because in the next few minutes, this small act of cruelty would escalate into something far worse. Something that would be recorded, shared, and remembered as one of the most shocking displays of airline abuse ever caught on camera. 20 minutes later, Sarah got up to use the restroom. It was a basic human need, the kind of thing that should never become a confrontation. But as Sarah walked toward the front of the plane, Jessica appeared out of nowhere, blocking her path like a bouncer at an exclusive club. "Excuse me, Where do you think you're going? Jessica's voice carried that same condescending tone that was becoming her signature. Sarah looked confused. To the restroom? Jessica planted herself firmly in the aisle, her arms crossed. The first-class bathroom is off-limits to economy passengers. Your bathroom is in the back. Now, here's what makes this moment so infuriating. The economy restroom had an out-of-order sign on it. Sarah could see it from where she stood. Every passenger in the back half of the plane could see it. This wasn't about policy or rules. This was about power and humiliation. The economy restroom appears to be out of service, Sarah said calmly, pointing toward the back of the plane. Jessica barely glanced in that direction. Then you'll have to wait until we land. The passengers around them were no longer pretending not to watch. An older businessman in seat 12A put down his newspaper entirely. A young woman traveling with her teenage daughter exchanged shocked looks. Even the passengers in first class were craning their necks to see what was happening. Sarah felt every eye on the plane watching this public humiliation. But instead of backing down, instead of accepting this treatment like Jessica expected, Sarah did something that caught the flight attendant completely off guard. She stood her ground. I'd like your name and employee identification number, please. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jessica's face flushed red, but not from embarrassment, from rage. In her 3 years of treating passengers like dirt, no one had ever had the audacity to ask for her identification. No one had ever stood up to her. No one had ever made her feel like she might actually face consequences for her actions. What did you just say to me? Jessica's voice was rising now, carrying clearly to every passenger within 6 rows. Sarah's voice remained steady, professional. Your name and employee ID. I'd like to file a formal complaint about the service I've received today. That's when Jessica completely lost it. Her voice became shrill, almost hysterical. Are you threatening me? Are you actually threatening a flight crew member? The accusation was absurd. Sarah had been nothing but polite, nothing but professional. But Jessica was playing a dangerous game now. Making threats against crew members was a federal offense, and Jessica knew it. I'm not threatening anyone, Sarah replied calmly. I'm simply asking for your identification so I can file a complaint through proper channels. But Jessica was beyond reason now. She spun around, scanning the cabin until she spotted exactly who she was looking for. Air Marshal, I need you up here right now. The entire plane went silent. Passengers stopped their conversations mid-sentence. Even the flight engine seemed quieter. Everyone knew that calling for an air marshal meant serious trouble, the kind of trouble that could end with someone being arrested, banned from flying, or worse. Air Marshal Thompson, who had been sitting quietly in seat 15C, immediately stood up. This was exactly the kind of situation he was trained for. A potential threat to crew members, a passenger who might be becoming violent or disruptive. But here's what Jessica didn't realize in her rage-fueled moment of power. She had just escalated a simple customer service issue into a federal incident. She had just called law enforcement on a woman whose only crime was asking for basic human dignity and wanting to file a complaint. And Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had remained calm through 20 minutes of abuse and humiliation, was about to show Jessica Martinez exactly what a real threat looked like. If you've ever been humiliated by someone in a position of power, if you've ever been treated like you don't matter because of how you look or where you sit, type justice. Click on the subscribe button and share your story in the comments below, because what's about to happen next will be the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever witnessed. Air Marshal Michael approached with the serious demeanor of someone trained to handle genuine threats. But what he was about to witness wasn't a security situation. It was a masterclass in how power can corrupt someone so completely that they destroy their own life in front of 50 witnesses. Jessica immediately launched into her fabricated story, her voice dripping with false concern. Officer, this passenger has been disruptive and aggressive throughout the flight. She's been making unreasonable demands, refusing to follow basic airline policies, and now she's threatening me personally. I'm genuinely concerned for the safety of our crew and other passengers." It was a complete lie, and Jessica delivered it with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. She had learned to weaponize authority, to twist situations until she was always the victim, and difficult passengers were always the threat. Air Marshal Thompson turned to Sarah, his hand resting near his badge. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to tell me your version of what happened here." Sarah's response was everything Jessica's wasn't. Calm, factual, and completely honest. "I asked for an extra pack of peanuts because I hadn't eaten all day due to flight delays. When that was refused, I asked to use the restroom because the economy bathroom is out of order. The flight attendant blocked my access and refused to provide her name when I requested to file a complaint. That's when she called you." The air marshal looked between the two women. One was agitated, defensive, clearly emotional. The other was composed, reasonable, speaking in the measured tone of someone telling the simple truth. But Jessica wasn't done. The fact that Sarah had calmly defended herself, that she hadn't been intimidated by the presence of law enforcement, sent Jessica into a spiral of rage that would define the rest of her life. "Listen here, you welfare case." Jessica's voice exploded through the cabin like a bomb. "Know your place." The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. Passengers gasped audibly. A woman in first class covered her mouth in shock. The businessman in 12A actually stood up as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jessica had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had revealed the ugly prejudice that had been driving her behavior all along. This wasn't about airline policy or passenger safety. This was about class warfare, about someone drunk on tiny amounts of power deciding who deserved basic human dignity. Sarah Mitchell slowly rose from her seat. At 45 years old, she had built a billion-dollar empire, employed thousands of people, and revolutionized aviation safety. But in that moment, she was simply a human being who had been pushed too far. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sarah said quietly. Those words should have been Jessica's cue to step back, to de-escalate, to remember that she was a professional representing an airline at 30,000 feet. Instead, Jessica saw Sarah's calm response as weakness, as submission, as proof that she had won this battle of wills. "The only misunderstanding," Jessica snarled, stepping closer to Sarah, "is you thinking you belong here." And that's when Jessica Martinez made the single worst decision of her entire life. Her hand came up fast, connecting with Sarah's cheek in a sharp crack that echoed through the pressurized cabin like a gunshot. The slap was so sudden, so shocking, so completely unprofessional that for a moment the entire plane seemed to freeze in time. Stunned silence filled the cabin. Not the quiet of people trying not to eavesdrop, but the absolute silence of 50 people witnessing something so outrageous that their brains needed a moment to process what they had just seen. A flight attendant had just physically assaulted a passenger, on camera, in front of an air marshal, with dozens of witnesses, over a request for peanuts and bathroom access. If you were in Sarah's shoes, what would you have done? Would you slap her back or forgive her? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more stories like this. Jessica stood there, her hand still raised, breathing heavily, her face flushed with the adrenaline of someone who had just committed career suicide, without realizing it. She thought she had just put an uppity passenger in her place. But in 30 seconds, when senior flight attendant Maria Williams emerged from first class and recognized exactly who Jessica had just assaulted, Jessica's world would come crashing down faster than a plane in free fall. Maria Williams didn't walk to the cockpit. She ran. Her 20 years of airline experience told her that what was happening in the cabin was about to become a career-ending disaster for everyone involved, but especially for Jessica Martinez. She burst through the cockpit door with the urgency of someone delivering news about an engine fire. "Captain Rodriguez, sir, we have a massive problem out here. Captain Rodriguez looked up from his instruments with concern. In 30 years of flying, he had learned that when a senior flight attendant used the words massive problem, it usually meant something that would end up in incident reports and corporate investigations. What kind of problem, Maria? Maria's voice was shaking. Sir, one of our flight attendants just assaulted a passenger. But that's not the worst part. The passenger is Sarah Mitchell. The name hit Captain Rodriguez like a lightning bolt. He knew that name from corporate meetings, from company newsletters, from the business magazines that featured her on their covers. Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any passenger. She was the woman who had revolutionized aviation safety, who owned airlines across 3 continents, who could shut down their entire operation with a single phone call. Sarah Mitchell is on my plane? Captain Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sir. Seat 23B. And Jessica Martinez just slapped her across the face. Captain Rodriguez closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In that moment, he knew he was witnessing the end of Jessica's career, and possibly his own if he didn't handle this perfectly. He emerged from the cockpit with the grave expression of someone walking to a funeral. The moment he stepped into the main cabin and saw the woman sitting quietly in seat 23B, his worst fears were confirmed. He had seen that face in boardrooms, on magazine covers, and corporate presentations. This was indeed Sarah Mitchell. And she was sitting there with a red mark on her cheek where his flight attendant had struck her. Captain Rodriguez approached Sarah with the careful respect of someone who knew exactly how much power he was dealing with. Ms. Mitchell, I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea you were on board. Those words hit Jessica Martinez like a physical blow. The name Mitchell rang in her ears like an alarm bell, but she couldn't quite place why it sounded so familiar, so important, so terrifying. Mitchell? Jessica repeated, her voice smaller now, uncertain. Wait, who is she? Maria Williams leaned close to Jessica and whispered words that would haunt Jessica for the rest of her life. That's Sarah Mitchell. She owns this airline. The words didn't compute at first. Jessica's brain simply refused to process what Maria had just told her. The woman in the worn jeans, the woman with the scuffed sneakers, the woman she had called trash and welfare case, that woman owned Prestige Airways? That's impossible, Jessica whispered, but even as she said it, she could see the truth in Captain Rodriguez's respectful posture, in Maria's terrified expression, in the way the entire dynamic of the cabin had shifted in an instant. Sarah Mitchell slowly stood up, and for the first time, Jessica saw her not as a troublesome economy passenger, but as someone who carried herself with the quiet confidence of absolute power. Someone who didn't need to announce her importance, because her presence spoke for itself. Ms. Mitchell, I had no idea. This is all a misunderstanding. Jessica's voice was rising in panic now, her earlier triumph completely evaporated. I was just following protocol. I was just doing my job. Sarah looked at Jessica with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had built an empire from nothing. The misunderstanding is thinking money makes someone worthy of respect. Those words cut through Jessica's desperate excuses like a knife. Because Sarah wasn't angry about being slapped by someone who didn't know who she was. She was disappointed that her employee thought basic human dignity was something you had to earn based on your bank account. Air Marshal Thompson, who had been restraining the wrong person for the past 5 minutes, quickly moved to Jessica instead. The federal agent who had been treating this as a passenger dispute now realized he was dealing with an assault on one of the most powerful people in aviation. Around them, passengers were pulling out their phones again, but this time they weren't just recording a flight attendant losing control. Some of them were starting to recognize Sarah Mitchell from business magazines, from news articles, from the covers of Forbes and Fortune. They were witnessing the moment when one of America's most successful entrepreneurs had been assaulted by her own employee. Jessica Martinez, who had spent 3 years thinking she was untouchable, who had believed her boyfriend's protection made her invincible, was about to learn that there are some people in this world who are so far above your pay grade that crossing them doesn't just end your career, it ends your entire future in the industry. The woman who had called Sarah trash and welfare case was now face to face with someone who could buy and sell entire airlines without thinking twice. The woman who thought she had all the power was staring at the person who literally owned the plane they were flying on. Jessica's hands were trembling now. Her face had gone from flushed with triumph to pale with terror. She was beginning to understand that she hadn't just made a mistake. She had committed career suicide in front of 50 witnesses and multiple cameras. But what do you think is going to happen to Jessica Martinez? She's standing there, restrained by an air marshal, having just physically assaulted the billionaire owner of the airline. Her secret boyfriend can't protect her from this. Her manipulation and favoritism won't save her now. Will Sarah Mitchell show mercy to someone who treated passengers like dirt for 3 years? Will Jessica face criminal charges for assault? Will she ever work in aviation again? Or is there a twist coming that none of us can see? Drop your predictions in the comments below. What do you think Jessica's fate should be? Because what Sarah Mitchell decides to do next will shock everyone on that plane, including Jessica herself. Captain Rodriguez knew he had to address the entire cabin. Word was already spreading through whispered conversations, and he needed to control the narrative before it spiraled completely out of hand. He picked up the intercom with the gravity of someone making the most important announcement of his career. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to personally apologize for the disturbance in the cabin today. We have our company owner aboard this flight, and I can assure you that the behavior you witnessed does not represent the values of Prestige Airways. The announcement sent shockwaves through the cabin. Passengers who had been filming suddenly realized they had captured something far more significant than a flight attendant meltdown. They had witnessed the owner of an airline being assaulted by her own employee. Maria Williams approached Sarah with the determination of someone who had seen enough. 20 years in the industry had taught her that some actions were unforgivable, and what Jessica had done crossed every line that mattered. Miss Mitchell, I recommend Jessica's immediate termination. This behavior is completely unacceptable. She has brought disgrace to our company and violated every principle of customer service we stand for. Jessica's world was collapsing in real time. The woman who had been her supervisor, who had worked alongside her for 3 years, was now calling for her professional execution. And Jessica knew Maria was right. There was no coming back from this. Maria, please. Jessica's voice cracked with desperation. Don't do this to me. I made a mistake. I can change. Please, I'm begging you. But Maria Williams had made her decision. Her voice was firm, final, carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed an unforgivable betrayal of everything their profession stood for. You assaulted our company owner and discriminated against a passenger based on her appearance. You called her trash. You called her a welfare case. You're finished, Jessica. Completely finished. The words hit Jessica like physical blows. She could see her entire future disappearing, her career, her reputation, her ability to work in aviation ever again. Everything she had built through manipulation and favoritism was crumbling in a matter of minutes. But then Sarah Mitchell did something that surprised everyone in that cabin. Actually, Maria, don't terminate her yet. I want to handle this personally. The words hung in the air like a stay of execution. Jessica looked up with desperate hope, wondering if maybe, impossibly, she might somehow survive this disaster. Sarah stood up and addressed Jessica directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built an empire, but also the wisdom of someone who understood the power of second chances. Jessica, you have a choice. You can make a public apology to this entire cabin for your behavior, commit to extensive sensitivity training, and spend the next year learning how to treat every passenger with dignity, regardless of their appearance or seat assignment. Or you can face a lawsuit for assault, immediate termination, and I'll personally ensure that every airline in this industry knows exactly what you did today." Jessica didn't hesitate. Through her tears, she chose the only option that offered any hope of redemption. "I choose the apology. I choose the training. Please, Miss Mitchell, I'm so sorry." Her 3 years of manipulation and favoritism meant nothing when faced with the consequences of her actions. The most expensive slap in aviation history had cost Jessica everything, but it had also revealed the true character of a billionaire who valued human dignity above all else. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't finished. What happened next would transform an entire airline industry and create ripple effects that are still being felt today. As the plane began its descent, Sarah made one final announcement that would change everything. She explained to the cabin that this experience would lead to immediate, company-wide policy changes at Prestige Airways. Every single employee, from ground crew to senior management, would undergo mandatory training programs focused on treating all passengers with equal dignity and respect. What happened today, Sarah told the cabin, is exactly why these reforms are necessary. We're going to implement new protocols, new oversight systems, and new consequences for discrimination of any kind. No passenger should ever be treated the way I was treated today, regardless of their appearance, their ticket class, or their perceived social status. But it was Sarah's next words that truly captured the heart of this entire story. Words that would be quoted in business schools and corporate training programs for years to come. "Respect isn't earned by your bank account. It's given because you're human." That simple statement encapsulated everything that Jessica Martinez had failed to understand. Respect isn't a privilege for the wealthy or a reward for first-class passengers. It's a basic human right that every person deserves simply by virtue of being alive. And then Sarah Mitchell did something that perfectly embodied her philosophy. When Captain Rodriguez personally offered to move her to first class for the remainder of the flight, she politely declined. She returned to her economy seat, 23B, and quietly finished her journey exactly where she had started it, while offering 3 other persons the opportunity, including the woman who could buy private jets chose to sit in economy. The billionaire who owned the airline chose to experience travel the same way as her customers. The CEO who could have demanded VIP treatment chose humility instead. Jessica Martinez's career was over, but her story became a cautionary tale that spread throughout the aviation industry. Airlines across the country began implementing new training programs, new oversight policies, and new consequences for employee discrimination. The slap that was supposed to put Sarah in her place instead put respect and dignity at the center of corporate policy nationwide. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have shown mercy to someone who had humiliated and assaulted you? Would you have used your power for revenge or for positive change? Let us know in the comments below, because your perspective on justice and forgiveness might surprise you. If you enjoyed this story of justice, subscribe to our channel and share it with others so they can learn from Jessica's mistakes and Sarah's wisdom too. Because in a world where power can corrupt and privilege can blind us, we all need reminders about what really matters. Treating every human being with the respect they deserve. See you in our next video.